What's up, YouTube? It's Coach Cory. Today, I'm going to tell you the best and worst brawlers for Robo Rumble. So, let's get into it. Alright, so really quick, before we get into the rankings, let's talk about the new Robo Rumble. In the new Robo Rumble, there's a bunch of walls that spawn randomly every single time you play Robo Rumble. So the map is never the same. So having a balanced team comp is definitely important, but also in the new Robo Rumble, funneling the robots into one lane is much more possible, and that changes the rankings from the last Robo Rumble video. So now brawlers that can deal area damage are going a little bit higher up in the ranking, and that can be very, very important later on if you want to get a really, really good time. So with that in mind, let's go into the rankings. All right, so starting out these bottom 11 brawlers, I'm going to recommend you don't play in Robo Rumble. I really think you really shouldn't play these brawlers in Robo Rumble. They're just not that great in Robo Rumble. And especially when you're using tickets that are a limited amount, they're hard to get a lot of, and you can get a lot of keys with them. You want to get the best time possible. I'm going to say don't use any of these bottom 11 brawlers. Now, with that in mind, you can get a max time with them, but usually it's because your other two teammates are brawlers that are good at Robo Rumble and they play well. So, with that in mind, also, in Robo Rumble, the Brawler DPS is going to be different. The amount of damage a Brawler does is different from normal gameplay because you hit almost every single one of your shots. So for instance, Colt and Ricochet, they're hitting every single shot. The amount of damage they're doing in Robo Rumble is way more than in normal gameplay. So other Brawlers that maybe can hit one or two shots and do really well in normal gameplay, like Piper, is going to have a really low overall damage in Robo Rumble. All right, so let's start out at the bottom of the list, and we're just going to go over these ones that you don't want to play really briefly. At the bottom, Piper. Okay, Piper, worst brawler Robo Rumble. Just her overall damage per second DPS is way too low. Doesn't have nearly enough damage. Her super's not very useful. She's low health. A lot of bad things. Bo, not enough damage. Mine's not that useful overall. They can be okay, but especially later on with the charger robots, they're just going to go right through them. They're not even going to affect them. And then Brock, yeah, again, just not high enough damage. Mortis, not high enough damage. You can technically, at the very end of the game, after the last boss, just run around with Mortis and have robots follow you, but it's really not a great strategy. It's an okay strategy, and before that, Mortis has to basically get carried because he just takes way too much damage and doesn't deal that much. Poco, again, not enough damage. Able to hit multiple robots, but his reload speed is really slow. And the other thing in Robo Rumble is your super takes way longer to charge. So brawlers like Poco and Nita, where they have decent supers, they're not going to get them nearly as much. And their supers don't charge any faster in Robo Rumble, unlike Colt, where you can hit 7 or 4 robots with his super at once. Nita, she's going to use the super and it's going to go down right away. Next one is Nita. And then Tara, similar thing. Just reload is too slow and not enough overall damage. Tara's not as bad as you might think, but the reload speed is just way too slow. Tara has a really slow reload speed. Crow just doesn't deal nearly enough damage. Crow is a chip damage brawler. He's going to poison people over time, keep them low health. In Robo, that's not what you want. And Crow has a really low health in general as well, so just not that great. Penny is not as bad as you might think. Her regular attack is actually pretty usable, but her turret is really not usable. And her turret just especially later on in Robo, all the robots are pretty fast. So a lot of times Penny's turret gets almost no hits and maybe gets a few. And even sometimes I've seen Penny miss shots on robots who just spawned. They just spawned, they haven't moved, and the turret still misses. Penny is not nearly as good as you would hope in Robo Rumble. Next up, Frank. Actually, no, Frank is actually decent. Sorry, so this is 10 brawlers. And then Spike. Spike is not as good as you would think because in Robo Rumble, Spike hits all of the shots and it's just not a lot of damage. Spike has a really low reload speed, so that hurts Spike a lot. I might have just said Frank, but Spike is probably at the edge of being usable. Spike is actually okay, but he's just really low health, so later on he's not that great. And he can't actually go over walls, unlike his other counterpart throwers. So Spike is not as good as you would hope. He's okay. You can definitely get a good time with him if your other two teammates are good. All right, now let's get into the brawlers that I would definitely recommend you use in Robo Rumble. All right, starting out at the bottom, though, at number 11 is going to be Jessie. Jessie is okay in Robo Rumble. You can definitely use her turret to distract enemies, and because of her star power, that's the only difference that honestly keeps her alive in decent in Robo Rumble, is you can keep her turret alive. Because without her turret, she's not nearly as useful. The one thing too is in the new Robo Rumble, robots do group up, so she can get a decent amount of damage. She does have a slow reload speed, so that hurts her and stops her from being anywhere near amazing. But she can be pretty decent in Robo Rumble. Okay, now at number 10, we're getting into Tanks Row. Tanks are actually pretty decent in Robo Rumble because of those charger robots. They're just so hard to deal with later on. And if you're running triple tanks, it's a very viable team comp. In triple tank, you just want to make sure that you guys are switching off healing and attacking. Now at number 10, we have Daryl. Daryl, probably the worst of the tanks. And his super is just not useful at all in Robo Rumble, along with his star power as well. So he has a decent amount of health. He's a shotgunner. He does good damage. So he's pretty good, but he doesn't have that extra stuff that makes him a little bit better than the rest. Now at number 9, we have El Primo. El Primo, also pretty good in Robo Rumble. He has the highest amount of health, tied with Frank, so that definitely helps a lot later on. And also with his regular attack, he can hit multiple robots. So being able to hit 2 robots definitely increases his DPS by a lot. And it makes him pretty decent overall. And you can combine El Primo with a lot of other team comps for that really high health brawler who can hit multiple robots as well. Now at number 8, we have Frank. Frank is actually a good amount better in the new Robo Rumble, where robots tend to group up a lot more. That definitely favors Frank as an area damage brawler. He can hit multiple robots at the same time. The one really big bad thing about Frank is he's going to take a lot of damage, and later on in the game, it's going to be really hard for him to dish out damage without dying. So as Frank, though, you can hit a lot of robots, definitely pretty good. If you can get your team to group up the robots and they can just help finish off, and you can just use his super and paralyze them and then get them all, that can definitely work really well. The other thing, though, is Frank isn't going to get his super back right away. It takes a lot of hits to get a super back, 11 or 12 about. So Frank's not amazing in Robo Rumble, but he's not that bad. If he had his star power, if souls dropped, he would actually be definitely a good amount better, and he would be doing a lot more damage. But because that's not true, Frank is going to be at number 8. Now at number 7, we have the last tank, Bull. Bull, the best of the tanks as a shotgunner, and his star power is definitely usable in Robo Rumble. Able to get that faster reload speed, that can be really key, and that can also be helpful if you have, for instance, a Pam on your team, where maybe he is able to get low health, take a good amount of damage, use his star power, and then heal up. That can definitely be useful. So Bull, one of the best tanks, and his star power, his super is not as bad. He can still use it to escape at the least or get closer to the boss. I would have Bull as the best of the tanks. Now at number 6, we have another shotgunner, the last one, Shelly. Shelly pretty good in Robo Rumble, especially with her super. She's a good counter to the charger robots, able to make sure they're not able to kill her teammates too well. Has a good amount of health as well, which can definitely be important later on. Not quite as much health as the tanks, a bit of an in-betweener between the really high damage brawlers and the tanks. She's able to be that staple in your team comp to make sure you can counter those charger robots later on. And she can hit multiple robots with her super, and she can stun them as well, which can definitely help you in the later waves. Shelly pretty good in Robo Rumble, can hit multiple with her super, and just in general, decent amount of health, decent amount of damage. Now at number 5, one of my favorite brawlers in Robo Rumble is Pam. And Pam, to me, should be a staple in every single time you play Robo Rumble. I would really recommend Pam. She is a number 5. She's not at the very top, but she's just so important to your team comp. That healing turret is easily one of the best things in Robo Rumble. It makes it so much easier no matter what level you're on. If you are new to Robo Rumble, if you aren't quite amazing at it yet, I would really recommend using Pam. Her turret is just so great at keeping you alive. If you have her star power, even better. Honestly, if you have her star power and you are standing in her turret, you can almost completely just stay still against a boss and just fire away, and you are really likely to not die. Okay, maybe you can't just stay still the whole time. You might have to dodge a small amount, but you can completely tank bosses as Pam. It just makes everything so much easier, and she has a high amount of health, which again is good versus charger robots, and her damage actually isn't that bad. If you're able to hit almost all your shots in medium to close range, Pam does a good amount of damage. That combined with her turret, she has a good amount of healing, good amount of health, and a good amount of damage. Pam can be really good in Robo Rumble. I definitely recommend using her almost every single time you play. Now at number 4, these are all going to be the brawlers that can deal a ton of damage and can be really key if you want to get the best possible time. You don't need them to get the max time, but if you want to get the best possible time, you're going to want at least 2 of these brawlers in the next list. Of course, the other one would be Pam, potentially, or you could do 3 of these brawlers as well. Now, these next 2, it's going to depend a little bit on your map spawn. At number 4, we have Dynamite. Dynamite is maybe the worst of the throwers, but he's still really good in his own right. And again, it does depend a little bit on the map. Sometimes there are maps that favor throwers really well, and sometimes not quite as much. But on those maps where throwers are really, really favored, they are amazing. And especially in the new Robo Rumble where robots group up, throwers are so much more valuable than they were before. And I definitely recommend probably having one of them. And if not, you'll see what I recommend. But throwers can be really, really useful. Dynamite not quite as good just because his super not as potential as Barley's. And we'll just go into it. Barley is number 3. Barley just has a little bit better area control. And it's a little bit easier to hit all of your shots with Barley. But the main thing separating Barley and Dynamite is his super. Barley's super can be destroy robots because you can easily group up at least a couple of them, and then you can have them just walk right into Barley's super. You can put it, normally with Barley's super in non-Robo Rumble, you want to space out his super, make it really spread out and push people back, do as much damage as possible. But in Robo Rumble, you want it a really small radius for his super, because you can do a ton of damage that way, and in Robo Rumble, it's not super hard to do. So I would definitely recommend doing that with Barley. That's what separates Barley from Dynamite. Barley's super just has the potential to deal a lot more damage, and that's why Barley's number 3 and Dynamite number 4. All right, now these next 2, if you haven't figured it out, and honestly, you could switch these 2 rankings. It's a little bit of personal opinion, a little bit of preference. At number 2, I have Ricochet. Number 1, I have Colt. These guys are by far the best in Robo Rumble. You can maybe argue Barley ahead of them. It's going to depend on the map for Barley, though. I think these 2 are the most consistent and a staple in pretty much every single team comp if you want to get the best time of the week. And I really recommend using at least one of them in any comp you use. These guys are the best damage dealers by a good amount, especially because they're super as well. And I mean, look, they're going to be hitting all of their shots. You can argue for Colt or Ricochet. Colt has one more shot than Ricochet in his normal shot. Ricochet can do a little bit more damage per shot with his with his star power. And that can matter a little bit as far as when he supers, if he can bounce. But it's a little bit less consistent as far as hitting all of his shots. That's why Colt is going to be a little bit higher than Ricochet for me. But these guys can deal easily the highest amount of damage, especially because robots can group up. You can super 2 or 3 of them, and you can get a lot of your super back. Especially within Robo Rumble, these brawlers just have so much health. Being able to deal the highest amount of damage possible is really, really important later on. Especially too versus the boss. These guys are really good versus the boss, as they can stay a good amount of distance away, deal a lot of damage, and it's not a huge problem for them. They can dodge his attacks, and they can stay away from him and still deal a high amount of damage and kill the boss really fast. So that can be really good for beginners. And on top of that, later on in the waves, you want those guys because they can super multiple robots at the same time, and they can get a good amount of their super back, at least half of it, if not 2/3, or all of it, depending on how many robots you hit. So these guys are going to be the kings of Robo Rumble. I recommend at least one of them in every single time you play Robo Rumble. And if you want any good team comp, like Pam, Pam, Ricochet, Colt, really good team comp. You can go Pam, Ricochet, or Colt, and Barley. That's another really good team comp. Those are going to be probably the best ones possible for Robo Rumble, is those 2 combined team comps. All right, guys, that's going to be it for my ranking video for Robo Rumble. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you later.